It was a very eventful Selection Sunday with some shocking decisions. We had said coming into this weekend that we wanted the selection committee to have to make a hard decision. Did they make a hard decision?
They made none of them. They made none of the hard decisions, in my opinion. That's the most frustrating part about this setup. And I've said it for a long time. I think the postseason structure in college football is not great. What we saw today from the selection committee doesn't give me any confidence that they will make difficult decisions to try to figure out the best field to honor some of the things that they tell us on a week-to-week basis. And that's what's really frustrating about this.
Right. So the controversial decisions that we finally got from them, they kept Alabama in the field.
Didn't move them.
Didn't move them down after a loss in the SEC championship game to Georgia. You can see the bracket if you're watching this on YouTube. I think everything else was pretty much as expected, right? Like we thought Indiana would slide up to 1. We did not think Ohio State would be penalized very much, so they're the 2 seed. Georgia and Texas Tech, that rounds out the top 4 teams that get a bye. Did not have to be a conference champion this year. Then the teams that were in position to host games all did not play this week and all stayed put. So Oregon at 5. Ole Miss at 6, Texas A&M at 7, and Oklahoma at 8. Then, as you said, Alabama stays at 9, which is where they were on Tuesday, where the committee had flipped them and put them ahead of Notre Dame. And then the controversial decision as well to now decide that the Miami result, Miami beating Notre Dame 3 months ago, comes into play, and Miami bumps Notre Dame out, and the Irish are the first team out, BYU after them. We also have 2 group of 5 teams in the field. Tulane at number 11 and James Madison at number 12, because James Madison, as the Sun Belt champion, was ranked ahead of Duke, the ACC
won
champion.
the ACC.
Yes.
And the thing that you mentioned, how we got here, part of this is that BYU dropped after they lost their conference championship game. You mentioned Alabama did not drop after losing their conference championship game, and neither one of them were close in their games, and that's part of the issue with how we got to the final selection of the field.
So let's start with that, okay? Because I think when you're looking for any sort of consistency out of the committee and what you might be asking them or to say, okay, what are we going to take away into next year? What did we learn on Tuesday that we're now going to take into Sunday? These were the final scores. BYU loses 34-7 to Texas Tech, a team it had already lost to, by the way, so you could still even make the case that they only lost to one team this year.
It was
that you
kind
should
of the
treat
same game
kind of like one loss, right?
No doubt.
But nope, they got penalized for that. 28-7, Alabama loses to Georgia, a team that they had beat early in the year by 3.
Sure.
But the committee is like, all right, well, that win over Georgia is one of the best wins in the country.
Well, the win over Auburn, too, was such a great win. They had to move them up.
Yeah, that 5-7 Auburn
team. They were
team.
setting it up.
They were setting it up. We said this after the Tuesday show, right? By moving Alabama ahead of Notre Dame, there felt like there was some wiggle room. They didn't even need it, apparently, because they didn't drop. But I think that is the problem. Now, moving forward, it's hard to trust the system that decided that a blowout loss mattered for BYU, but a blowout loss did not even affect Alabama's seeding. When, I have to tell you, 2 years ago, when we went through this in the previous most controversial Selection Sunday with undefeated ACC champion Florida State, and Alabama gets in over them. They're always in this position, right? On the cut line.
It's amazing. Keep going.
But when that happened, one of the reasons that the committee went to was they said, you know, FSU isn't playing well without their quarterback.
Sure.
We had that whole long Jordan Travis conversation.
Yes, we did.
But they were like, well, Alabama's playing really well. Like, we want the best teams now for the best games. Is Alabama playing well right now? When was the last time they played well? A month and a half ago?
Yeah, I'd say you got to probably go back to the October, beginning of November, certainly, to find a time that they were playing well. Listen, these last few games, their offensive line has been exposed. There's been a lot of pressure on Ty Simpson, who has also not played very well. He's turned the football over. He hasn't racked up a ton of yards like we saw early on in the season. Like, this is also, they're excusing an Alabama team that I just don't think is playing their best ball right now. We had this conversation leading in, and I thought it was a really important one, on the place of conference championships, because a lot of people were saying that Alabama making the conference championship game in the SEC should mean that they're a team that's in the college football playoff. My response back to that is, well, the committee's already told us they think they're the 5th best team in the SEC by where they've ranked them, and they put them squarely on the bubble. They were the second to last at-large team in there. I don't think anybody who is the second to last at-large team in a playoff field is absolutely in. You have to treat them as a bubble team. And when a bubble team gets blown out, to me, that's where you open up the conversation. Where do they compare against Miami? Where do they compare against Notre Dame? Where do they compare against BYU? And to me, they actually look a lot like Texas right now in terms of what their actual resume looks like. Where do they compare against them? And they just didn't do that. They didn't take the opportunity at all to make those comparisons. And that's the really frustrating part here is I'm not willing to say that off of tiebreakers in these bloated conferences that the committee's 9th team and 5th best in their eyes in a conference is a lock to make the playoffs. That is insane behavior.
I am with you completely because I think the way that we're talking about conference championship games is a little bit of a problem, right? Because you're thinking about a conference championship game where you should get credit if you win and you perform well and you have this extra opportunity. But people are asking for no penalties if they lose, which is wild to me because I just think, we never have games without consequences.
Sure.
Why wouldn't there be both? Why wouldn't it be viewed as an opportunity to play your way in to the field, like lock yourself up? Because, I'm sorry, wouldn't Alabama have probably jumped up to 3?
I think they probably would. And by the way, their game against Auburn was a play-in game. If they lost that game to Auburn, they'd be out, right? So what's the difference here? It's one more game that they lost. Like, we should consider that.
Well, and also, okay, so again, if we're saying, let's hypothetically say they would replace Georgia, right? If they'd won the SEC championship, that's a 6-spot jump. That means other teams fall because they got jumped or they're affected by it, depending on where Georgia would fall.
No doubt.
So in this situation, we are like, okay, no penalties. But,
just for the SEC, though.
Right. Sorry. BYU did have a penalty for losing their game. So that's what's like hard about this conversation. And we can argue whether or not we think this decision incentivizes conference championship games to continue on or not, because I do think that was part of the calculus. We were talking about this a lot. We were watching these games together yesterday. If the committee dropped Alabama out entirely, that sends a message to everyone, especially in the SEC and probably the Big Ten as well, that you don't want to play in that game.
Right. It's I guess the flip side of that too is like if you're Georgia in that game, if you're Alabama in that game, why wouldn't you just roll out your 2s? Because both of you were in. Right. Like the whole idea to me is it feels like the conference championship game is still in this weird spot where, to your point, if you're going to penalize teams and they drop out, like people are going to be up in arms about not wanting to go. At the same time, why am I playing this extra game? Like, we're both in here. Like, what am I doing this for? And that's this era that we're in right now. We're trying to protect some things that exist in the past and I think are really important. I mean, you saw the jubilation on the Indiana players, right? Like, you don't think Kirby likes having more trophies? Like, this stuff really does matter. It's a big deal to Texas Tech, huge deal to Duke, even though they didn't make it. But it's not the same in terms of where it fits into the landscape of actual college football playoff, postseason seeding, etc. That's a problem for me.
Well, and there's also a couple of other problems that we saw exposed. We've talked about this, like the tie-breaking procedures everyone came up with 2 years ago with these bloated conferences, trying to figure out, hey, how are we going to determine which teams should go, especially if they don't all play each other, you don't have divisions anymore. Well, now you also ran into a situation in the ACC where Miami was not in that game. So I think you, at the very least, probably need to add tiebreakers where it says after a head-to-head result, we go by CFP ranking. Sure. Because it should be your highest ranked teams.
It gives you the best opportunity
to get them in. Right. Yes. So I think that that's part of this as well. And a lot of these problems, including the value of a conference championship game, are exacerbated by the fact these leagues are 16, 17, 18 teams.
So let's talk about the ACC situation here, because I think part of what we saw today was the committee having to make a decision on whether they would leave a Power 4 conference out of the college football playoff this year.
So let's pull the bracket back up, because I think this really underscores it, where you see Tulane at 11 and then JMU at 12. Last year, the ACC champion did not get a bye, right? They were the 5th ranked one, so they were the 12th seed. But this is going to cause a lot of problems and a lot of consternation, right? That 2 group of 5 champions made it.
Yeah, and we'll have that conversation in a sec. The interesting thing about Miami getting in is there was always this thought process, and we discussed it last night where we were watching games when Duke won, is are they really going to tell the ACC that they aren't in the college football playoff whatsoever? And I think this has now become a referendum on we have to make sure that the ACC is in there. Of course, we're not going to screw with the SEC in their championship game. Big Ten handled business the way that they needed to. It wasn't a question. And we all felt confident that the Big 12 was getting at least one team in and probably would have gotten 2 with BYU getting the win. Notre Dame is on the outside looking in because they don't have the conference affiliation. And you and I well know that there has been a groundswell of people in this sport who are like, no, they should join a conference at some point. And this to me feels kind of like the message of, well, we'll do the head-to-head thing and we'll get our way into that, but we're not leaving the ACC out here. Like Miami was going to get in Notre Dame, it's a shame. But if you were in a conference, maybe you would have been in here too.
That is an interesting dynamic because I do think people wondered how that ACC championship game would come into play here. If Virginia had won, do they just stick Notre Dame still in, right? And not worry about that. And I think that's when you have a human selection committee. They'll never say that. But does that come into the back of your mind to make sure that there is ACC representation? And again, Miami was the best ACC team. And
by the way, you don't think that the conference people are lobbying the folks on the selection committee? Like, again, human element, they're supposed to stick to.
The Miami lobbying has been everywhere.
No, I mean, we see it on Twitter, right? Like you don't think they're actually talking to those people and being like, hey, you should really consider what you're doing here. And these are folks who are not dumb and they understand the consequences of their actions. And I mentioned it off the top, I just don't think they want to get into the business of doing difficult things that might also blow up the sport as we know it.
Right, which I think would have been dropping Alabama entirely.
Yes.